Sandra has done that, so you'll notice that. But if for some reason you notice you're unmuted, maybe mute again, because sometimes something can disturb others that comes into your background. The structure for today will be 4 sessions, and in each session I'll be leading a meditation, and there'll be discussion, and there will be sorry, Andy was saying something to me, that there'll be discussion, and there'll be a talk, and then we'll have a break, and so on throughout the day. There'll be half-hour breaks and 1-hour lunch. So, as I said, we're going to start with a meditation. And I think we're going to learn a lot about ourselves today, thinking about this topic. So I'm going to invite you to get into a meditation posture. And that might be different for each of you. But you will know that the main thing is having a straight back and not being too tense and not being too floppy. So it's an alert, relaxed attitude of mind, and similarly, this is the same with the body. And this is an analytical or reflective meditation, thinking about your own experience and focusing on when you become angry with situations out in the wider world. For example, when you watch the news, or you read the paper, or you hear about something that's happened, or the actions of leaders or key people, or perhaps something more close to home when you're shopping or driving or phoning a call centre, whatever comes to mind as a recent experience of your own anger. And when we say the word anger, of course there are degrees. So there's a full-on rage, an aggressive stance, but before that there's a whole lot of other permutations: irritation, annoyance, frustration, a kind of build-up. So when we're saying anger, I'm talking about the range of anger, but certainly where your own peace of mind becomes disturbed, where your own resting state is disturbed. And this is likely to be physical as well as mental. But of course, you may not notice all the detail. So choose an example from the wider social situation, or another social situation closer to home, where recently you were angry. And just think about the situation and circumstances. Might be useful to think about the build-up. Sometimes it feels very instantaneous, but actually sometimes it's got a lot of preludes, steps beforehand, or conditions that were just right. Also, your own internal experience might have gone into a quick escalation, or it might have been this incremental, step by step. It may have been a positive cause that led to you being angry. It may not have been frustration or at something negative, but your wish to do something good, or your compassion that something harmful was happening to others. But something about your own equilibrium is being disturbed, your own well-being. But if it was one of these positive situations, perhaps as a call out for social justice, recognize that. There might be some good intentions there. Or even if you were irritated with something more close to home, you might have been thinking, well, I can manage this, but this is going to be difficult for the next person, so I'm going to speak out here. But somehow in the process, your inner balance got lost. So notice what your thoughts were, what you were thinking about, and in a way, what thoughts were fueling the anger. You might have had some indignation. How dare they? I don't deserve this. That's outrageous. It'll be different for each of you. And try to be a keen observer without judging yourself. Notice all the feelings that go with the thoughts. It may be pain, hurt, feeling put down, wounded. Just notice the different emotions that came along with the anger and in a way supported the anger. Again, being non-judgmental but observant. Fear can often come in and be very close to anger. And then notice the physical sensations that you had. These will vary, but also depend on how aroused you were. And there's a physiological basis for these. It's not something conscious or something you're doing. It's coming with all the package. When we feel angry, our body is primed, getting ready for fight or flight. So chemicals rush about in the brain. Hormones start to rage in the body. The blood flow changes. It goes to our muscles. Our face might become flushed. Might feel our heart racing. And our muscles clenched. Just notice those sensations. Of course, they might have been milder. Perhaps if it was outrage with a distant figure, depending on how strongly we were feeling this. But good to notice these physical implications. And all of this can lead to our actions. The combination of our thoughts, our emotions, and our physical sensations, physiology. For example, the chemicals in the brain and the adrenaline and other hormones can override the part of the brain that uses judgment. That doesn't kick in as quickly as these other chemical and hormonal reactions. That's why training to practice patience, to overcome anger, is quite helpful, because we can help that part of the brain kick in more quickly. But it can be overwhelmed if we're not skillful. or we can continue to fuel our anger with more feelings of being hard done by or disparaged or neglected, whatever it is. So then just notice in your particular example how you resolved it, how the energy that you were putting into it softened. Either how you resolve the external situation or the internal one of feeling calmer. So now just focus on your breath and allow the breath to calm you, to relax you from the intensity of the meditation. And we were looking at anger and how it affected you. And if there was anything you discovered in this meditation, just note it for later. Might be something to explore more, something to share with someone more, something to change in future. Something to harness, to recognize that actually the issue is important and you want to do something constructive about it. Return to this place of equilibrium, evenness. Allowing the breath to soothe you, to increase the oxygen in the body, to allow you to naturally calm.
So the next activity, you're going to be in breakout rooms. Now I note that Sheila and Adita are on the same device, so I'm going to let you two talk to each other. I think that's best. Yeah. And no, sorry, just working this out. Yeah, when you get to the breakout room, you'll need to unmute. And you'll have 5 minutes each. Yeah, we got plenty of time. We're actually doing well for time. You'll have 5 minutes each, and I will signal after 5 minutes for you to swap over. Okay, or you can time yourselves. It's up to you. And the question to discuss, or the issue to discuss, is anger with things in the outside world. Okay, anger with things in the outside world. Sheila wants to ask a question, isn't it?
Well, can't Aditya and I join another person? All I need to do is get close to her, and we just move the camera across.
Yeah, Sheila, if you do that, then you'll be a group of 3, and you would have about 3 minutes each.
Okay. Oh, I see. You're making it into 2s.
I'm making it into pairs.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Not to do with you not being on screen, no.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Okay. So, can you find, you choose who goes first, and then after 5 minutes, I just want to, there's somebody who, oh yeah, I see, it doesn't matter. Yeah, everybody keep muted when you're in the whole group, because we get a lot of feedback. When you're in the breakout, though, you'll have to unmute yourself. And yeah, you've got 5 minutes each way. And Shan will join in so that we get proper pairs, okay? Right, okay, so you'll be back here in 10 minutes, and you'll have 5 minutes each way. So just choose who goes first. One of you talks for 5 minutes, the other one listens, and then I give you a 5-minute signal and you swap over. Okay, see you later. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We've just got a few minutes now for people to share anything they would like with the whole group. Maybe something that came out of your discussion with your partner just now. If you'd like to speak, just put your hand up and then I'll invite you. Okay, I think Paul and then Lynn.
Yeah, hi Andy, Shan. I spoke with P, who's from Portugal. We were very similar places in terms of not overblown anger, but just irritation and frustration, the lack of any skillful response to COVID. That all we see in the media is obsession with holidays and hairdressing, when there was such an opportunity to learn so much more from that 4 months of lockdown. We were very much in a similar sort of place. P may want to say more. It's a pure reserva conchelos, I think, about that. But yeah, we had a very good conversation actually in a very similar place.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Lynn, you had your hand up.
Only to say, I'm not sure if we're recording this. It looks like to me we are, in which case we should.
No, we shouldn't be. Sandra, you were going to pause the recording. Yeah.
Andy,
Yes.
I'm sorry about this, but I've got it's my camera's
A challenge. Have you spotlighted the video, Sandra? Can you just put your thumb up or down? Have you spotlighted the video? Yes. Okay, so now you start recording. You are recording. Okay, fine. Okay, So in this chapter, Shantideva, chapter 6, the topic is patience. And I'm going to pick out a few verses as we go through the day. The verses don't necessarily correspond clearly with what you've just been discussing, but in general, all the discussions and meditations are going to be about anger, and all Shantideva's comments are going to be about anger and how to deal with it. And I'm going to start with verse 3, where he says, "My mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred." So we can say painful thoughts of hatred or painful thoughts of anger. We could put all kinds of words in there like disgust or rage or fury or anyway, whatever. And there's two main points that I want to draw out of these two lines. The first is that these thoughts are painful. Often when we get angry, we actually want to cause pain to whoever or whatever we're angry to. But actually, we cause ourselves pain. If you just think about the times whenever you're angry, maybe even in the meditation you've done, it may have stirred up some feelings, and those feelings are painful. So why would you inflict pain on yourself? Usually, the best answer to that is because you've lost control. Nobody would cause themselves pain deliberately. Well, maybe a masochist, but in general, no, people do not cause themselves pain deliberately. And then fostering painful thoughts means to feed them with more and more ammunition, if you like, with which to hurt yourself. And what it does is it prevents you from experiencing peace. And the tragedy, I won't even say irony, the tragedy is that we're angry because we want peace. We think that whatever we're angry with, whether it's a person or a situation, is disturbing the peace. But by getting angry, we disturb the peace within our own mind. And I think this is a really fundamental point that's going to come up right through the day, and it's kind of one of the key points for us to reflect on. Because the more we reflect on this, the more that our rational mind will tell us, I don't want to get angry. I'd like to find a remedy for this tendency. I'd like to try to overcome it, actually. I'd like to not get angry. So this is the meaning of what patience is. Especially, I mean, sometimes we usually use the word patience for, well, no, not usually. We use the word patience for not getting angry, but we also use it for being willing to wait. But that's also connected with anger, because we get angry that we don't get what we want right away. We have to be patient. So in both cases, it's really about anger. And patience is the topic of this chapter. The topic is not anger. And that's quite reassuring, really, because what it means is that the whole purpose of this chapter and the purpose of our being here today is to help us learn to develop patience. And to do that, we need to look at and acknowledge our anger. And sometimes we feel, oh, I'm a very calm person, I don't get angry, because we got a way of keeping the lid on it. But that doesn't mean we don't get angry. First of all, there's a possibility of it exploding, which can happen from time to time if something bursts our bubble. But also there's suppressed anger inside us. So we can't say, I don't get angry. All we can say is, I'm managing to keep the lid on it. And that's not really healthy, is it? I mean, it can actually cause lots of problems. So then the verse continues, I shall find no joy or happiness, unable to sleep. I shall feel unsettled, And that's a feeling which I think we all know. And then there's a couple of verses on, verse 5, it talks about the effect on our friends and relatives when we are angry. By it, friends and relatives are disheartened. Though drawn by my generosity, they will not trust me. In brief, there is nobody who lives happily with anger. So it doesn't matter whether you express the anger or whether you hold it bottled up inside. It creates an energy which is unpleasant for other people. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter what the anger is about. You're not a comfortable person to be with. Even if you yourself are a warm, generous person and you attract people, after a while when they're around you, then they start to feel uncomfortable. So this is a second reason why we should develop patience. Now, having discussed disadvantages of anger, Shantideva then goes on to reasons, if you like, why we should cultivate patience. And I'm going to jump to verse 10, where he says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? Now, this really applies to all situations that we get upset about or annoyed about. What it means is, if it can be remedied, don't waste time with getting it all emotional about it. Actually get on and do something, because you can remedy it. You know, sometimes you can be around people who just love to moan, and you feel, why don't they just do something instead of moaning? Because they're trapped in a kind of moan syndrome. In fact, it's almost as if that's their default position. Or maybe it's just part of the culture that they're in, that's how you talk to each other. You always find something to moan about, and you tend to agree and support each other's moans. So you feel you're with a friend. Oh yeah, we both moan about this or that. But Shantideva is saying, no, that's not healthy. If it can be remedied, stop being unhappy about it and get on and do something. And the interesting thing is that once you get on to do something, you don't feel unhappy anymore. There might be some of the energy of the anger, but that energy is now being channeled in a constructive direction because you're actually doing something. In fact, you're making good use of the energy that made you angry, instead of the energy of anger and hatred and so forth is very destructive, whereas the energy of doing something about it is actually constructive, because then you have to think about, well, what am I going to do? And you have to figure out the strategy or the way forward for resolving this issue. And, you know, you might fail, but at least you're trying. And then at the end of the day, you can feel, well, I did make an effort to do something about it. And then you do feel better. And then there's the third and fourth line. What is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? Now, this is a different thing, which is about accepting what you can't do anything about. Accepting not that it's okay, you know, it might be that there's a wrong going on. But if you can't do anything about it, how shall I put it? Maybe you have to live with it for now, until such time emerges when you can do something about it, and then you get on and do that. So it may be only a temporary phase. It depends what it is. In my case, since I was about 50, I've had arthritis. And sometimes it's so bad, it makes me feel very cross. It's a great teacher of patience, because this is an example of something that can't be remedied. I do take supplements and I do take exercise and I do watch my diet, etc., but it's still there. And there are many things in life like that. They were sort of things we were born with. They're congenital. So we have to accept those things. There are also things in our situation which, at least for now, we have to accept. It's like that when you break something, isn't it? Let's say you drop a valuable vase. Well, you can feel angry with yourself or with the world or something that made you drop it. But actually, the fact is it's broken. And however much nice Harold art you use, it's never going to look the same. So there's no point in being unhappy about it. That's the point. That's what's being said here. Maybe you have to go through a little grief. I think that maybe we have to have a little room to feel sad, but that's not feeling angry. It's not like we have to make a meal of it. We just have to be honest. Oh, I'm going to miss that. Yeah, oh, that's sad. Work through that and then move on. Then Shantideva continues with the sort of thing about cultivating patience. I'm going to read verse 14 and then maybe 15 and 16, but certainly 14. There is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. So a great example of this is getting old. Because when you first start to age, you just get little discomforts. You know, it starts to be a bit more difficult to bend down, or, you know, maybe you find it, your eyesight's not quite as good. I remember when I first started having to read reading glasses, it was quite a shock to the system, but I could have very mild ones. Now I have the strongest reading glasses you can get, and so on. I mean, I could give many examples from my own experience of getting old, because now I'm getting on a bit, you know. But you start off by getting used to small things, and this builds your resilience for bigger things. This is really, really important, to be able to handle the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to quote Shakespeare. Things happen to us. We can call it bad luck, we can call it bad karma, we can call it what we like, but the point is that things happen. And however much we rally against them, some things it doesn't change the situation. Sometimes we call it being philosophical about life. When you just sort of, okay, that's how it is. Okay. There are many ways of coping. You can look at the good things in your life and weigh things up and see that actually it's not all bad. You can compare your situation to people who have the same thing but much worse. You can reflect on how fortunate you are in so many ways. But these are strategies. The main point is that you get used to that problem if it's something that you can't do anything about. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. Who has not seen this to be so with trifling sufferings such as the bites of snakes and insects? I don't know about snakes, but certainly insects. If you get a bite, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but you just have to accept it. I mean, you can put some cream on it or something, I suppose. Feelings of hunger and thirst. That's a good example. If you're feeling thirsty, but it's quite a way to the tap, if you're on a walk or something, you know, back to where you are, or you need to go to the loo. There's all kinds of things where you have to kind of just lump it and get on, and don't give it too much mind. And such minor things as rashes. Okay, so these are, he's trying to give examples of small things, and then as a result of becoming acquainted and accepting those things, bigger things will be better. I should not be impatient with heat and cold. Those are examples of what we can't really adjust much. We can go indoors if it's hot, but even then it might be hot indoors, and so on. And same with cold. Wind and rain, that's the weather. We know, don't we? I mean, he was in India, but we're in Britain, so we really know about that. And then he says sickness, bondage, and beatings. That sounds pretty scary, but he's now beginning to sort of up the ante and say, well, having got used to small things, even big things. And this kind of reminds me of the Tibetan who, who in jail, tortured, was afraid of losing his compassion for the jailers, which is a story His Holiness often tells of one of the Tibetans who came out. And there are many examples. What about Nelson Mandela, 28 years in prison? There are many examples of people who learn to endure. And if we think about them as an example, actually, it can also help us to put up with smaller things. If I am impatient with those things, the harm they cause me will increase. And that's a very true thing that we know from experience, is when you get worked up about something that's going on that's giving you some problems, it makes it worse. Sometimes the best thing is to put your mind to something really constructive, and then you stop noticing the bad thing. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to give formulae that this is always going to solve it. It's not. Sometimes there is something you can do about it. I think here we're talking about things that you can't do anything about. Okay, now there's a section, just a few minutes left and then we'll have a break. There's a section on the benefits of suffering, and it's verses 19, 20, 21, which I'll just read through and then say a few words before we break. Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. I found that very inspiring 2 lines. When the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. So they do not clench up and start getting aggrieved around the problem. The problem's there, but they stay calm and tranquil and sort of work with it. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. This is what the wise are doing. They're overcoming their anger, which is called, in Shantideva's terms, war against the disturbing conception. And you can cause harm to your anger at the time when something could make it rise by pacifying it. The victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth. Common warriors slay only corpses. So he's really kind of talking about the Bodhisattva warrior. This is a person who, in order to become suitable to benefit others, needs to overcome their own afflictions, such as anger and hatred. And so that person is seen as a hero in this kind of discourse. A hero for being able to conquer their own afflictions, overwhelming them, I suppose. It's not that they don't suffer. It's not that they don't have those problems. It's more that they cope with them, and it doesn't stop them from their greater purpose. Furthermore, suffering has good qualities. Through being disheartened with it, arrogance is dispelled. And this is one of my big takeaway points from this whole chapter, that suffering is a great teacher of humility. This is something I've experienced myself, that it makes me realize I'm no great shakes because of having this experience of my own pain and acknowledging it and saying, yeah, that's part of me. Actually, in other words, owning it. Because often the anger is an attempt to disown, to separate yourself. And actually, the sense of being disheartened is what we also in Buddhism call renunciation. It's actually a kind of mind that says, actually, this body or this state of mind of what we call samsara is suffering. And I should get out of samsara. I should transcend through my practice, understanding, meditation on the nature of reality, on emptiness, which will come up in a bit later. In other words, this disheartened feeling dispels the arrogance, it reduces the ego, it brings us down to earth, if you like, and then it gives us a motivation to practice the path. And furthermore, compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. That means all the suffering beings that surround us. Because we've deflated our own pride and arrogance, we have the space for compassion for others. We're not so wrapped up in ourselves anymore because we don't see ourselves as some special case who, you know, is fine or deserves a good lot or something like that. Negativity is shunned. In other words, because of seeing that anger causes problems, we will try to avoid it. And joy is found in virtue. In other words, we start to enjoy doing what is positive, doing what is beneficial for ourselves and others. And of course, that is the path. That is the whole path. It's not just the path of patience, it's the path in general. So in all these ways, learning to accept the sufferings which might make us angry can be a very good practice. That's not to say suffering's a good thing. That's to say, if we use it wisely, remember it said, when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. So the point now is to figure out how to be wise. What does it mean to be wise? Okay, and I'll leave it there for the break. We'll come back in half an hour at midday, and we'll have another session of an hour before we break for lunch. So thanks very much, and we'll see you after the break.
Okay. So we're going to mute everybody, and people, it's just maybe Christian, I don't think you're muted. Somehow you got missed out. And we'll again just gather our energy back so that we can meditate. Just check your posture and then just take a few conscious breaths to bring your energy back inwards. And connect with that equilibrium that I was talking about before, that sense of balance within oneself. Because we need to feel familiar with this, because when we feel angry, or any of those other words or terms that we use, irritation or upsets or frustrations, that we lose that balance. So it's a kind of a home we need to be able to return to when we feel that equilibrium, that balance. Very gentle well-being. And our breath really can help us center, particularly around our heart center, also stabilize us in our navel center, ground us. And also, you know, if you're meditating on this and looking at things that bring up disturbance, just go back there for a moment. Go back to that space that holds you. Because to meditate on these things, to reflect on them, is not to disturb you in an uncomfortable way. It's to look at what's there, notice it, and then think if there's any action to be taken. So from that grounded place, I'd like to invite you to think about anger again. And particularly if you can bring an example to mind, or several examples if it helps you build on your understanding. But this time in relation to your family. And I'm thinking particularly of your family of origin, although also can be that might be the same as your current family, but for some people there'll be a second family. Or you might have a sense of even a kind of non-biological, but a strong sense of family in the here and now too. And to think about anger in relation to this family, this kind of extended family, but not so extended that they're not that family experience. Because so much is formed in that system of people, particularly your experiences growing up. But then your parents were people growing up in other generations and other experiences. And you will have indirectly absorbed some of those as well. Some of the family history will be there. Family events or traumas that impacted on your parents, those that cared for you, other significant people. But think about just your own experience for the moment, thinking about anger, conflict in the family, not theoretically. And think of what anger particularly affects you. And where it triggers your angry or irritable or frustrated or exasperated, fed up response. Start with even a small example, but maybe one that feels a bit typical. Here we go again. Again, start to be aware of the thoughts that you associate with it, what you say to yourself around it. And what feelings, what emotions accompany that, particularly in yourself. You might feel it in particular parts of your body also. Do you notice? And then notice also the connection with all of those things, with what you do or did on this occasion. And again, it's not about being harsh on any of the people involved or yourself. This is just being curious and observant. And then think about whether this is a pattern. If this happens, if the content might change, but there's a similarity that continues in these kinds of incidents. Is it a particular thing that triggers you in different situations? Is it something that is carried over, or you carry over to even situations outside? See if you can unpack your example a little bit more in this direction, but also if you run out of mileage on this one, then you can use other examples, but try to sort of see how they might be linked. Is there a theme? Some family history coming in. Some alliances or coalitions that are being acted out. It's useful to understand where the anger comes from. Because different situations can be equally in their content more uncomfortable, but it's when we get triggered that's significant. So what are the triggers for us that are going on here? And they may be larger than just this example or situation. There might be deeply held feelings of patterns or themes of feeling left out or feeling sidelined. Feeling judged. Just notice whatever they are. Not getting into the feeling, just noticing. Or other assumptions or beliefs that are being pulled in there, that are underlying. They might fit with the family history. They might fit with family beliefs, like to do that is being lazy, or that's not deserving, or you can't trust people outside the family, or I mean, there's a zillion possibilities. And you've grown up with these so that you're now taking them on as your own thoughts, your own feelings. Taking you into situations where you lose that balance. So returning to your breath and to your sense of groundedness, centeredness, equilibrium. Just breathing into that. Noting anything that you want to look into further at another time. Noticing anything that you particularly want to make note of, to think about more or do something differently in future. One thing we can learn from anger, or all its permutations, is that sometimes something has to change. It can be an indicator. The change might be within you or something externally, or somewhere where you put a boundary or change in your relationship. But just notice if there's anything you want to make a note to yourself. Particularly allowing yourself to come back to a more centered, balanced place. Allowing your breath to settle you and calm you.
Okay, so there were a couple of things that went wrong with the breakouts last time. One was that Sophia got left on her own. So if that happens to anybody this time, just leave the room and that'll bring you back into the main room, and then I'll be here and I'll try and help out. If necessary, we can just have a discussion, the two of us, whoever it is. But I think basically I set it up not very skillfully. So I'm going to set up breakout rooms again, and it's possible that there'll be a group of 3, because I'm not going to this time make the effort to put Sheila in a room on her own. Okay. So we're going to move, if you've got the text in front of you, I'd like you to turn to verse 31. I'm going to read the verses and we're going to talk about it. And this next section is all about emptiness. And emptiness is the ultimate source of patience. Understanding emptiness will totally transform any anger that you have. But of course, understanding emptiness is a very deep thing. It's not just intellectual. I mean, it starts intellectual, but then you have to go deeper. Let me just read the verses first, and then I'll say a few things about what it says. Hence, I'll leave out the hence, because that's referring to what came before, which we're not going to look at. Everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. Having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena which are like apparitions. If everything is unreal, like an apparition, then who is there to restrain what? Anger. Surely in this case, restraint would be inappropriate. This is an objection, and now here's the response. It would not be inappropriate, because conventionally I must maintain that in dependence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. So, when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. So this happy frame of mind is the mind of patience, which this chapter is sort of teaching us really how to develop patience. So let's go back to the beginning of 31, which is about everything being governed by other factors. So like some of you, I went into some heavy family stuff in the meditation. And when Shan said something about, well, what do you do? How do you resolve it? I realized that the way I resolve it is by thinking that all the things that I'm angry with from my family, they were caused. They were caused. I mean, in my case, it's to do with my parents. And anything that my parents did or said to me, which hurt me, was a result of things which had been said or done to them, which hurt them. And they did not have the control. They did not know what they were doing. They were just acting, I suppose you could say, what would you say?
Acting out of their pain and
acting out of their pain and distress. So this had a major impact on my childhood, and this has left me with stuff to deal with all my life. But you know, I don't necessarily regret it. But having thought that it's all governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others, because the things that happened to them, I mean, they, for one thing, they came out of the Second World War, the generation which Doris Lessing calls the children of violence. So what happened to them was partly to do with the war and everything that led up to that. So this is the way it goes. And once we start recognizing that, it leads on to the realization that nothing governs itself. This is quite powerful. Nothing governs itself means that everything is subject to causes. Everything is the result of something else. Nothing is kind of self-established as governing itself, as being established by itself. And having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena which are like apparitions. So this phenomena also includes people that you feel angry towards, but it could also mean situations, because we get very stewed up by situations. But when it says they're like apparitions, it means that they don't have any substance in and of themselves. They're created by causes, and they just appear, but they don't have the substance that we ascribe to them. And of course, when we're talking about the family, we're often talking about childhood. And in childhood, we don't know this. In childhood, we think everything is the way it looks, because we haven't kind of yet figured out that there's something behind what happens to us. But that's something we can sort out later, maybe, by thinking about it. So then the following verse starts, if everything is unreal like an apparition, then who is there to restrain what? Anger. So take out what's in brackets. It says, then who is there to restrain what? Now, this is the realization of emptiness, that oneself is like an apparition. The person that one's angry with is like an apparition. And so everything is empty, including the relationship. The relationship itself is empty because everything in that relationship is interdependent. Let's just take the word me, you. Okay. If you think me, then everybody else on your screen now, I don't know if you can see several people, but whoever's on your screen is you. But that person is also thinking me about them, or those people are thinking me, and they're saying you, which includes you, which you think is me. So what this shows is that me and you are just relative. That means that in and of themselves, there is no me or you. And it's in this sense that we are like apparitions. We are labeled me or labeled you, or give yourself a name. I'm labeled Andy. But Is there any real Andy in here? No. But when you see me, and those who know me, do you look at me and think, oh, that's Andy out there, over there, in that person? Probably. That's the sort of normal way to think. But actually, the label Andy is coming from your mind. And when you deconstruct any situation where anger is involved, it's the same. You and whatever or whoever you're angry with is like an apparition. Not actually an apparition, but like an apparition, as it says at the end of 31. So then an objector says, well, surely then restraint would be inappropriate. In other words, what's the point of being restrained if you and the other person are just apparitions? It's kind of funny to think about that. You know, well, why not just punch them in the face if it's an apparition, sort of thing. Ah, Faye is coming. Hello, Faye. Oh, good, you made it. Sorry, I've been wondering where you were. Okay, great. Well, welcome. We're just in the middle of things. I'm just talking about some verse 32 actually in the text. If you've got the text. I'm going to mute you as well. Oh, you muted yourself. That's great. Okay, so the objector says, surely restraint would be inappropriate. And then Shantideva says, this is really important. It would not be inappropriate because I must maintain that in dependence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. In other words, why we need to restrain from anger is because it stops suffering. Who's suffering? Well, just start with yourself. You don't want to suffer. Stops your own suffering. But also, your anger is only going to make the other person suffer as well. So it stops the suffering of both. Even though you're both like apparitions. The fact is that we don't realize that we're like apparitions. Even the suffering is like an apparition of suffering, but we don't realize that. For us, the suffering is something very real. It's complex, and it's to do with what Buddha taught us, the two truths. And it's the relationship between these two truths which we need to understand to really get this point. So there's the conventional truth, or relative truth, which is what appears. And then there's the ultimate truth, which is the way it actually exists. So it appears in a false way, and therefore it's sometimes called obscurational truth. It appears as if it exists independently. Just think of anybody that you've ever been angry with, including yourself, and you think that that person that you're angry with is real from their own side. And when you're angry, you feel that you're real from your own side because you feel sort of puffed up with anger. But ultimately, because of being the result of other factors, as it says in 31, governed by other factors, none of the people is real like that. I'm the product of my mother's and father's cells that came together at my conception, and then all the upbringing, the food that I've eaten, that's my body. Whatever I've learned in life, that's my mind. And that all come together, and that's labeled me. That's labeled Andy, but it's not more than a label. Once you realize that, you can't get angry. Once you realize the other person's like that, you can't get angry. So this is why emptiness is the cure-all. This is what emptiness means. It doesn't mean not existing at all. It means existing like an apparition, merely imputed by the mind, but nevertheless existing and functioning. And yes, there is suffering. There is suffering. And that's why we need to restrain from anger, because it only makes things worse for ourselves and others. And so therefore, when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, and frankly, that could also hark back to our first meditation in the first session, where we were thinking about the wider world, but it might imply in the family too. Maybe some improper things happened in your family. By thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. So Shantideva is not denying that such things happen, but they arose from conditions. And the more that you go into understanding what the conditions are, the more the heavy bit comes out of it. And actually, it might even be that you can do something about it because you're not so locked into this horrible feeling. So there's, you know, even when there's something you can do about it, to take that solidity out of the situation by thinking of emptiness will help you to remain in a happy frame of mind. It means the equilibrium, which Shan talked about in the meditation. I think happy doesn't mean, you know, happy clappy. It means just to remain calm, to remain positive in yourself. And then you can tackle these things. So a prerequisite, really, of dealing with things in a proper way is to feel calm. So that's why in the Dharma we do start with many practices that will help us to achieve calmness. Shan keeps bringing us back to the breath. Very useful for just calming your mind. And then you can look at things more dispassionately. And then you can actually work on things and so forth. Okay, now then, that was emptiness. And now there's the question of karma. So if we go to verse 42, and then we'll look at a couple more verses, and then we're going to stop for lunch. Okay, Nalini, sorry about your battery, but thank you for letting us know. So the verse 42, previously I must have caused similar harm to other sentient beings. Therefore, it is right for this harm to be returned to me who caused injury to others. Now, I just want to add a sort of cautionary note to this. This is not a way to think about other people. So don't go saying to somebody else, oh, you must have done that to somebody else, so it's your just rewards for what you did when they're suffering. No, this is a way to work on yourself. This entirely to work on yourself. And it takes time. This is not something you can do quickly. But when you think about the harms that have been done to you, and I guess that's happened to all of us at some time or other in our life, then to think about karma, to think about all our experience is the result of previous actions, very likely in previous lives, so we don't remember what we did. And anyway, to think, if I've been reborn beginningless times, then I will have done everything under the sun to others. I will have created every harm in the book to others, and that will have left some kind of potential on my mind stream, and at some point those potentials ripen as experiences coming back on me. That's how it is. This is a very, very helpful way to think, in my experience. It helps you also with getting angry with others in all kinds of ways, because when we get angry with people, we usually otherize them. For instance, I'll just give you a really extreme example. We watched this Netflix documentary about Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe one or two of you might have seen that. I'm not recommending it, it's pretty horrible, but still, it's quite useful in some ways. I mean, what he did was horrific. But it's very easy to otherize somebody like that, to say, oh, well, he was a terrible man, I would never do that. Well, be careful of the word never, hopefully one wouldn't do that in this life, but in previous lives one certainly did do that. And somehow I find it quite helpful to recognize that it's not unusual. It's just, it is wrong. Of course it's wrong. And we should take steps to eliminate even the possibility of our doing those things again. But the fact is that the sufferings that we experience in this life have a deep cause in our own mental continuum. They don't just come from somebody else that's nothing to do with us. Actually, at a certain level in the past, we did create a cause which has now ripened in this situation with another person. But we created the cause to be in that situation. It takes maturity to work on this, because it's heavy stuff, some of it, that we have to acknowledge, especially when really bad things have happened to us. We have to, really come to terms with having created the cause of that, when actually somebody else did do something to us, and yes, they are an agent of something wicked or negative, and yes, they have harmed us, and yes, they are going to pay the karmic price themselves. So it's not like it's all in here. It's not. It's out there and in here. But in terms of why did this happen to me, there is a back history in our own continuum. So 45, it's the fault of the childish that they are hurt. So childish here means people who are not aware of the effect of actions. And that's most of us most of the time, frankly. We engage with life without being aware that there are going to be consequences of many of our actions. So later we will get hurt. Although they do not wish to suffer, nobody wants to suffer, nobody wants to create the causes of suffering. We do it because we think it's a cause of happiness. But actually, many of the things that we think are a cause of happiness are actually a cause of suffering. Although they do not wish to suffer, they are greatly attached to its causes. So we can be attached to bashing somebody up who insulted us, and then we create a karmic cause to be bashed up in future. That sort of thing. It can happen like that because we just feel indignation that they called us this or that. And of course they shouldn't have called us this or that. And it's right of us to respond and say, that's nonsense. But to really engage with them in a violent way, that's also creating karma. So why should they be angry with others? This is the childish. Just like the guardians of the hell worlds and the forest of razor-sharp leaves, so is this suffering produced by my actions, with whom therefore should I be angry? So this is saying we create the situation that we're in karmically. I mean, actually being a human is a really, really good deal. So, we should be very relieved anyway, generally. But there are bad things that happen to us in a human life. But if you think about some situations, and mentioning here the hell worlds, the forest of razor-sharp leaves, this is really kind of non-stop pain, to be frank, a kind of rebirth which is non-stop pain. Those environments are produced by karma. Those trees with razor-sharp leaves do not grow from any seeds other than the negative karma of the beings who experience them. And that negative karma is produced in a life like a human, or maybe an animal, or something, anyway, some other life. And then when they're reborn, their experience is of such an environment. And so that environment is a karmic appearance. But actually, that also goes for things that happen in our life. I mean, mostly, I don't know about you, but my environment is quite pleasant. I've got a nice garden, I've got nice sunshine some of the time, and you know, going to have some lunch now, got some food to put on the table. I mean, you know, well, that's the result of good karma. It doesn't just come out of some kind of magic, fortune's wheel. There are causes for why I have these positive things, but also I have some negative things. So because the sufferings that one gets are caused by one's own actions, he says, why, with whom therefore should I be angry? So in a way he's saying, if you're going to be angry with anyone, be angry with the person who created the causes back however many lifetimes ago, which in a certain way was yourself. I mean, it's not the self that you feel yourself to be now, because it was a different being, but it was on the same mental continuum. So in a sense, we have some kind of ownership of responsibility. And of course, the good thing about that is that we have the opportunity to now create causes to have good experiences in future by creating positive karma in this life. And I guess that's really one of the teachings or lessons, you know, from thinking about karma, is to think, well, I'm not going to make those mistakes again because I didn't enjoy the results. And then we stop being the childish. Then we start becoming the mature, because the mature are wise. Yeah, inequalities and injustices that are not people's fault. I'll just quickly respond to this, and maybe if necessary, we'll go into it again later. So these things definitely are injustices, and definitely there should not be such inequality in the world, because fundamentally, naturally, by nature, we're all equal. So they come about due to causes. And so then the question is, why did I end up with such inequalities and injustices? It doesn't make them right, but nevertheless, there are karmic causes for why I received that. And that is a difficult thing to come to terms with. But definitely that doesn't mean we shouldn't call them injustices or inequalities and try to change them. In fact, it's really positive for us to try to do something about it now, especially the ones that we're most aware of, because they affect us or because they affect our friends, or we just feel compassion. So yes, inequalities and injustices are wrong. But that doesn't mean that there aren't karmic causes. Yeah, I know government policies, violence and aggression. Well, to be born in a fascist state, or to be born in a state which has got, where the people have some power, is also karma. Doesn't mean that fascism's okay. Okay, we'll leave this for thinking about over lunch, because it's now time to stop. And we can go into it a bit more later, maybe, because that's a really good question. And it always comes up with karma. Okay, so somebody's going at 3, Kathy, but we are going to start again at 2, so you don't, we'll see you after lunch. So, okay, let's all break now for an hour. Thank you very much, everybody. And Lynn wants to say something.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to say this before. If you don't
Yeah. I think it might be 2 minutes.
Just wait a couple of minutes. And people that are waiting just a couple of minutes, you could just start to get yourself ready, comfortable, grounded. And I think we're all here now. So just make a gentle start. So if anybody's not muted, could they mute themselves? So we'll do a meditation. Great. I think everybody's muted. Lovely. So in an unrushed way, prepare for meditation, so that meditation isn't something you can run into. I remember Alan Wallace, when he went off to do his first shamatha retreat, he said he kind of, drove himself, got himself to India, got up and just couldn't wait to get up the hill, sort of feeling. And actually, it wasn't the place to start. We have to kind of let things drop away a little bit. And setting our posture helps. And as I've said before, so does the breath. The breath can be an anchor. But there's also a physiological reason. It really does change the dynamic in our body. So finding your centered, grounded place. And breathe into it so it feels strong and stable. So the nature of our mind is completely pure. Until we're enlightened, it's overshadowed by the afflictions, the emotional afflictions and obscurations that cover over this clear nature. But the relative nature of the mind is just clear awareness. And its ultimate nature is empty of any inherent existence, doesn't exist inherently. So when we return to this place, although we may not have this full experience, because it takes a lot of meditation, we can trust that it's there. We can trust that this clear awareness that is empty is there. That's our nature. Anything else that comes along are just ripples on the surface. So we can see this as our innate goodness. And it can be a point of refuge. When we're in touch with this mind, it's the same mind as our guru, as the Buddha. The clear, knowing, empty nature of the mind that's there all the time. It's not that it's going to come sometime later. It's just that we have to do some clearing. So this is why it's inner refuge, your inner guru. And when we're in touch with this, because it's there all the time, we can trust in ourselves, in our ability to remove what are temporary faults or difficulties, to be able to return to that place that's there all along. So just looking at some of the things that are part of the clearing process is what we're doing today. And in this meditation, I'd like to invite you to explore anger with someone very close to you. But I suggest, if this becomes problematic at any point for anyone, that you just return to the more grounded, centered space, knowing that it's underpinned by this basic nature within us. So again, taking a personal example of a person that you're close to, that most of the time perhaps you're not in friction with them. But then out of the blue, it seems, suddenly you can find yourself very worked up. Of course, it's not entirely out of the blue. There's layers and layers there. But again, just explore this for a bit. Be aware of the feelings that it brings up for you. And also pay attention to what's going on underneath. Perhaps other emotions of fear or anxiety, disappointment, loss. Just be aware of whatever are some of the underlying feelings that might make this particularly painful interaction. Some of these feelings may belong in the here and now with this person. But some may have an extra power because of other situations, or some of the family histories we talked about previously, some of the patterns, some of the fears and threats that you brought with you. So what might seem like a small incident that descends quickly into something bigger, it's often got a lot behind it. And then there's also what we heap onto it in the moment. Kinds of assumptions we make, our self-critical thoughts, our self-doubt and lack of self-confidence. So there's the situation, but there's all these other things that were going on before and after. And of course, it's sometimes more painful because it's someone we care about and love. But it also gives us an opportunity to see what happens in the process of anger, of how we start to narrow down our vision and just focus on whatever it is in that moment. and forget some of the other things. Something that there's a physiological basis for, again, that we become just concentrating in a very narrow way, focused down, forgetting other aspects, and exaggerating in that sense. The way anger is defined in Buddhism is an exaggerated mind. And when it's someone we love, we can recognize that it's really not a reliable emotion. Because it distorts things. So again, becoming aware again of our centered space. Which, as Lama Yeshe would say, is clean, clear. Without all these overlays that we are part of and create in our life. So within this clean, clear space, just noting anything to explore more for later. Dispel any self-critical thoughts.
And we're going to look at the topic of forgiveness first, and we're going to start with verse 67. If you want to follow it. So verse 67, which I'll read out, says, "Should one person ignorantly do wrong, and another ignorantly become angry with that wrongdoer, who would be at fault? And who would be without fault. Now you just apply that to the person that you're very close to, where, you know, you quite often have this sort of one person ignorantly says something which hurts the other person, and then the second person ignorantly gets angry back at the first person. So to me, this questions who would be at fault and who would be without fault is really an invitation to practice not blaming. You know, there's actually coming, there's a statement by Naropa, samsara, which is a state of suffering, is finding fault in other people. It's quite a radical statement. It doesn't mean that other people do not have faults, but it means that when you know, when you look at other people through that lens of finding fault, you're making a big mistake, and you're setting yourself up for your own problems. And this again harks back to the thing about karma in a way, which is the good thing. The teachings on karma are difficult, and I think the issues that Nalini raised before the break were very good, about social injustice and even governments doing wrong to their people. It doesn't mean that any of those things are justified or okay, but when one's working with oneself, then it's very helpful to take responsibility. It empowers you. That's the good thing about it. It makes you feel stronger, to feel, okay, I did stuff in previous lives that I've forgotten, and now I'm going through this, but I can get over it, and I can make sure that I don't create those causes for the future. And however challenging it is, you are more empowered by doing that than by blaming the other. As soon as you blame the other, you give the power to them for your misfortune, your unhappiness, your suffering. Once you accept the responsibility, although it's in such a distant past that you can't identify the cause, there's some feeling of being grounded in yourself, I think. Let me just interject before I carry on, which is that Nalini very helpfully put a couple of questions in the chat. And because there's not time for question and answer with what I'm talking about from the text, if you do have any questions, you can write them in the chat and I'll see them and I'll try and answer them as part of the flow. Don't do too many, but if there are, there's the odd one or two, that's okay. Okay, so then if we carry on to verse 76, it's really building on the same theme. And Shantideva says, should someone else find joyous happiness in praising my enemy as an excellent person? So here, I just want to pause because the word enemy is a bit problematic to me. I think instead of saying enemy, I'd say the person I'm having difficulty with, because especially if it's someone close to you, you're very unlikely to call them your enemy, or you wouldn't feel that you were close to them. But even, most of us would not think of having many enemies in life, but we could certainly think of people that we have difficulties with. And from time to time, I mean, as Shan said in the meditation, you can actually really love somebody and then get angry with them. So at that time when you're angry with them, you're what is being called here your enemy. But, as I say, I think it's an unfortunate term in some ways. But if someone else finds joyous happiness in praising my enemy as an excellent person, why, mind, do you not praise them too? And likewise, make yourself happy. So I'm going to use the example of somebody that you're close to, because that person that you're close to has got a private face with you, and then they've got a public face, which they show to the people that they're not so close to. And often the people that they're not so close to might think they're a wonderful person. And you can think, oh yeah, but I know better because I know what they do when they're in private. And so when it's like that, and you hear somebody saying, oh, they're so wonderful, your father's just amazing, or your mother's just great, or your partner's just beautiful, or oh wow, your sister's just incredible. And then you think, shit, but they don't know her or him, you know. And then you feel bad because you think, oh, I know that they're really grotty or something. But then what that person's praising them for, which is, okay, it's their public face, but it's very likely stuff that they do in general, which is really good. And so if you learn to acknowledge that, as well as all that difficult stuff that you have with them in private, then actually you get a much fuller relationship. That's one good thing. But also it helps you to undo the negative pain of the anger that you feel to them by actually seeing something good that maybe the world sees and experiences. It's a complicated issue. But there's many people who've done a lot of good in the world. Yeah, no one is really good or bad or good. Well, that's a very good point. But also, I wanted to say there's a lot of people who do good in the world, but in their private life, they have difficult relationships. It's quite common, actually, because that's where they take out all their angst. Whereas in the world, they're kind of, doing their good stuff. Anyway, this is perhaps connected to verse 76. And then 77 follows on, that joyous happiness of yours, which you would get if you also praised them, would be a source of joy, not something prohibited. In other words, it would be a good thing to praise them. You see, as Nalini just pointed out in the chat, nobody is totally good or totally bad. So why don't we just focus on the good when we're talking about people or thinking about people, and see the problematic things as stuff, well, okay, well, let's just try and sort this out. Let's try and deal with that, but not use it to damn them, which is what anger does. Anger condemns the other as a bad person. And it's never the whole truth. Never the whole truth. There's a good resource inside everybody. Appreciative inquiry. Okay, that's a methodology. Familiarity breeds contempt. That's a cynical way of putting it. Okay. And absence makes the heart grow fonder. Okay, these are all platitudes. Okay. That joyous happiness of yours would be a source of joy, not something prohibited. A precept given by the excellent ones, which means the Buddhas, and a supreme means for assembling others. In other words, the Buddhas have taught us to praise others, to see the good in others, to rejoice in others' good qualities, even if we have a problem with that person. Okay. There are many situations in which we can practice that, even going right back to the public sphere, where it's very easy to condemn all those politicians that you disagree with. But sometimes it's good to have a little look at, well, maybe they're doing some good in the world. And then you can rejoice in that. And you can allow yourself to have a nuanced view instead of this whole black and white thing, which we often push ourselves into, especially with politics. So this is all about forgiveness, I think. And that is a theme which really comes up in the second half of this chapter. And if we go to verse 87, Shantideva says, even if your enemy is made unhappy, what is there for you to be joyful about? Even if your enemy is made unhappy, what is there for you to feel joyful about? You see, supposing that you really put them down, this person who's done something you don't like or has an attitude you don't approve of, or maybe even somebody who harmed you in the past, you make them unhappy by putting them down or yelling at them or whatever you do, well, that doesn't actually make you feel joyful. For you to find joy yourself, you might have to do something positive. So it goes on, you're merely wishing for them to be hurt did not cause them to be injured. And that's quite interesting too, because this is often what's going on in our mind when we think about people that we don't like, is wishing them bad luck almost, actually. Even if if the enemy does suffer as you had wished, what is there for you to be joyful about? If you say, for I shall be satisfied, how could there be anything more wretched than that? So the person who gloats over the humiliation of their enemy or the person that they've fallen out with, it's not really great, is it, to be like that? It's something wretched, as Shantideva says. It's something which shows, it demeans you if you gloat over another's misfortune, even if you fell out with them and had a difficulty. This is complicated. You know, some people might have done us terrible wrongs, but it doesn't help us for them to die of cancer suddenly or something, you know? It doesn't help. To help ourselves, we have to work through it, sometimes in relation to them, sometimes within ourselves. That's what we really need. They've got their own karma to deal with. That's another helpful reason for thinking about karma, actually. And it helps you to develop compassion to somebody who's wronged you, is to think, yeah, they have to suffer the consequences of that harm. This can also come with the social injustice thing, actually, that all those people who are responsible for social injustice, you know, I don't know if anybody's been watching that series Once Upon a Time in Iraq. Well, it's all about the Iraq War. And you can't help ending up thinking that there were 2 or 3 people who carried the most heavy amount of blame for having instigated the most terrible suffering. And actually, in my case, it's helped me to feel compassion for them because of the consequences on them karmically. And that sort of shifts things in the way you look at things. And you realize that there's an ignorance behind these kind of decisions. That doesn't mean that it's okay. You can forgive people in a certain way, in your own heart. And that heals you as well. I'm not saying it's going to solve it for them. Although you could say, well, may I help you one day, in many lifetimes when I'm enlightened or a Bodhisattva and I can help people. But, you know, this is something about the tragedy of the world. So now I want to move ahead and look at another verse, 93. When their sandcastles collapse, children howl in despair. Likewise, when my praise and reputation decline, my mind becomes like a little child. So this is about the harm that others do to us by destroying our good name. When people tell bad stories about us to others, or when they put us down, then we feel deflated. It's our pride, actually, that's injured. And that's childish. That's really what's being said here. But we become like a child. And then 98, praise and so forth distract me. This is the disadvantage of praise and having a good reputation or working to build a good reputation in the world. which is what these are called the 8 worldly concerns, or 2 of them particularly, which is looking for praise and looking for a good reputation. They distract me and also undermine my disillusion with cyclic existence. In other words, they make me feel that cyclic existence or samsara is good because I'm doing well in it right now. I start to envy those who have good qualities. So it all becomes a big competition to be the best at whatever it is. And all the very best is destroyed. That's actually, I destroy my own good qualities. Therefore, are not those who are closely involved in destroying my praise and the like also involved in protecting me from falling into the unfortunate realms? That's kind of radical. This is typical Shantideva radical approach to personal development, which maybe some people think you need a bit of therapy and counseling first before you can handle this. It's really amazing, but he's saying really that it's good. You rejoice when people say bad things about you because it helps you feel humble and it keeps you from falling into the lower realms of samsara. Those who wish to cause me suffering are like Buddhas, bestowing waves of blessing, as they open the door for my not going to an unfortunate realm. Why should I be angry with them? Now, I don't know if any of you have ever practiced this, but I've really worked at it at times, especially when I had a job and there were people I fell out with. And I tried to think, if I can be patient with this person, then it really helps me, even though they were telling bad stories about me in the organization, it really helps me not to be arrogant, because that's really what's rising to the challenge, is your own arrogance. And that's not good for you. So that's quite an interesting dynamic. So this falling to the lower realms is something Shantideva brings this up because he's working within a sort of paradigm where what happens to you in the next life is kind of understood as critical. Most of us don't really think very much like that these days because we're not in that sort of culture. And so fear of falling to the lower realms might not be the highest thing on our priority of what would stop us being angry. It's worth thinking about, but actually destroying your happiness now and destroying the happiness of others around you might be more powerful as a motivator for many of us than fear of the lower realms. We're all different, but maybe sometimes it's really good to think, I could die any moment, and depending on what karma is ripening at that time, my next life could be dire or it could be okay. And so we should really think about where we're going next, and we should try to cultivate a really positive mind all the time, so that when the death does come, it will be okay. We'll go on to a good life, or a reasonable life, or a continuation of what positive things we have in this life, especially being able to practice Dharma. Fear of the lower realms is a very powerful motivator when you get into it. But in my experience, it's not easy. I have had some experience of that, and it was so powerful. It made me really want to realize emptiness as quickly as possible, because that's really going to save you. But I'm not going to get into that at length now, because I think we're kind of more immediately addressing what anger is doing to us in this life, how destructive it is of ourselves and our relationships. So we've got one more session, and we've got a common structure now. Next time, there's a slight change in the structure, which is that after the pairs discussion, I will talk about some more verses, and then we'll have a 10-minute group feedback session in which you'll have a chance to feedback on the whole day. So look forward to that as well, and then we'll finish at 4:30. So have a half-hour break now, have a cup of tea, whatever, and see you in about half an hour. Okay, thanks a lot.
So just a couple more people to come back. To find your meditation space, and again that nice settled physical and mental space. I'm just remembering that Kathy can't come back, so it could be that other people, there's someone else that can't, but we've still got a couple of minutes. So returning briefly to this home space, this place of inner refuge. And recognizing that it's there all the time. We don't have to go elsewhere to look for it. But of course, in our everyday experience, situations arise, feelings arise, memories arise, where this space seems more remote. So how can we support ourselves at these times? One of the important ways of dealing with this from a Buddhist point of view is to recognize what the Buddha taught, that there is suffering. And at times when we have difficulties of a myriad of different ways, that it is suffering. And in that, we're no different than anyone else. Obviously, our particular sufferings may vary, but to acknowledge it as suffering and in the nature of samsara is really important, because then we don't blame ourselves. We can look at any extra layers we might add to it in the here and now, and we can recognize that it's also created by a karma. But that can be empowering because, of course, we can create the karma for something different. But what we can take away is this self-critical, blaming, hard on ourselves, rubbishing ourselves, all the self-doubt, on top of what else has gone wrong. So acknowledging suffering, acknowledging that we're not alone in it. It's other people experience suffering in different ways. So then we don't have to run away or hide from it or blame ourselves in a way that is unrealistic. And it can also help us reach out to others, because when we recognize our own suffering, we recognize that others too suffer. And sometimes they're not just being difficult or awful for the sake of it. So it can make us more self-accepting and more accepting of others. So there's been some studies on self-compassion. And some of those that are not convinced about this have raised the possibility that actually this could make us complacent. Self-compassion could be self-complacency, but it's the opposite. Accepting ourselves as beings who suffer, who are not alone in that suffering, without adding the self-critical thoughts, really can help us begin to work on our emotions, regulate our emotions, and also build up our stress tolerance. Because we're not damning ourselves at the same time. And if we get something wrong, we can do something about it. We don't have to beat ourselves up. Because we will make mistakes, we're human. So reaching out to others at this time for support is really helpful. But there isn't always immediately somebody there. So it's important that we have ways to be very gentle and kind to ourselves. Kristen Neff, who's the researcher that's done most on self-compassion, talks about changing your critical self-talk to positive self-talk, to reassuring yourself, I'm not alone. I'm not fundamentally flawed. I'm okay. I need to be kind to myself. And she suggests even using touch. For example, when you're doing the breathing, putting your hand on your chest, or if that's not comfortable, on your belly, or if that's not comfortable, on your face, stroking your hands, but touch. Again, there's a physiological basis for it, of calming and soothing. If you want to try one of those while we're just talking through this meditation, that's fine too. Feel that power of touch to anchor yourself. And change your inner dialogue to one of self-understanding, kindness. And If you're being particularly hard on yourself at some time, try saying to yourself, what would I say to my best friend or my dear loved one at this time? Chances are you'd be a lot more forgiving and understanding. So even when you mess up, in fact, especially when you mess up, try this recognition of the problem, but self-acceptance of your own human foibles, difficulties, blockages. And remember this home space of calm equilibrium. And then think about how you might use the situation that you're in, or the relationship, or any aspect of your life that's causing difficulty, as grounds for practice. Tenzin Palmo, the nun, the cave in the snow nun, talks about how sometimes people say, it's just people that get in the way of my practice, I'd be okay otherwise. But she says this is a mistake. People are the practice. So certainly whatever difficulty is there is a means for practice. To change what can be changed, to accept what can't be changed, to reach out to others. But on the basis of being kind to oneself. And the research has shown that, in fact, the criticism that's levelled at self-compassion is the opposite. If you accept yourself, if you accept who you are, how you are, with all your limitations, actually that can help you change. It's not forcing change, it's allowing change. Allowing the butterfly to come from the chrysalis. To remove the restraints. And particularly the practice of patience. This is something that life gives us many opportunities to do. So instead of resenting whatever it is that's slowing you down, getting in your way, being a source of distress, see it as a time to practice patience. Or a time to practice loving kindness. A time to apply any of the teachings that fit For example, remembering that we have a precious opportunity with this human rebirth, or that life is short, so we don't want to waste the time. If we never met any obstacles or any difficult people, it would be much harder to develop. And recognizing that our basic nature is pure, being clear. This helps give us confidence. Because this self-compassion is then actually just recognizing that these problems or faults or difficulties or hard times we might give ourselves are just temporary. And they can be removed with patience and gradual work at them. And to build resilience, we can go back to this place of refuge and stillness. Rebalance ourselves. Emotionally regulate. And thereby increase our capacity for benefiting others.
Okay, so this is the final breakout.
No, you're talking first, aren't you? Oh no, breakout. No, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I just got to. Yeah. Okay, so in this breakout group, look at some of the issues raised in the meditation. We could say, how does forgiveness and compassion towards oneself lead to forgiveness and compassion towards others? How would one lead to the other? Also, we can look at the dynamic of guilt and shame and blame, and how if we feel guilty, that means angry towards oneself. If we feel ashamed, blame ourselves, then it's just the other side of the coin of blaming others. So really, you can look at it from the point of view of overcoming these negative things and allowing these positive things, which is more the emphasis in the meditation. Okay, so you've got 10 minutes again, and I think you'll all be in pairs, so you've got 5 minutes each way, and I'll send a message halfway through. Okay, have a good discussion. Have an open forum for about 10 minutes to give feedback from the day, which you might want to say something from your recent discussions. And then we'll have a dedication and finish at 4:30. So the final section really emphasizes how much we need all sentient beings, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for our path to enlightenment. And, you know, we're talking here about the Mahayana. I mean, this text is called The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So a Bodhisattva, by definition, has love and compassion for all sentient beings. That includes all the ones who give you grief. You have to have love and compassion for them, or you're not really following the Mahayana. And so the Mahayana needs real special techniques, in a way, or emphasis, let's say, on how to bring that about. So that's why we often work on the people who really give us difficulty, as we have been today. You know, we really work on those people who somehow make us angry. Whether it's justified or not, that's not the point. The point is that we have this anger and that it's destructive. It's destructive of our happiness, it's destructive of their happiness, and perhaps even more important in some ways, it's destructive of our path to enlightenment. And why would I say that's more important? The reason is because the world is such, it needs us to become enlightened. It needs us at least to become an Arya Bodhisattva, which is somebody who spontaneously has active altruistic compassion, whoever we meet. You know, imagine that you bumped into Donald Trump as you were walking down the street. Or, I don't know, whoever your bugbear is in the world. Would you be able to feel, may I become enlightened in order to liberate this one? That's the question. That's what spontaneous bodhicitta is. Even if you hear a bird sing, it said, you know, it should evoke in you the wish to become enlightened in order to liberate this one. You know, even however beautiful it is, that bird is still trapped. And so this has to include the people who are really difficult. And that's why there's this sort of emphasis, which we've been focusing on today, on patience, the enemy, anger and hatred, and all those difficult emotions. Okay. And that's where we're going in the final part of the chapter. And I'm going to, again, pick out some specific verses that emphasize this. And we're going to start on verse 105. A beggar is not an obstacle to generosity. In other words, the person to whom you practice generosity is not an obstacle to it. I cannot say those who give ordination are an obstacle to becoming ordained. It's ridiculous. There are indeed many beggars in the world, but scarce are those who inflict harm. So in other words, those who inflict harm on me are the only means whereby I can develop patience. So they're not an obstacle to becoming patient, developing patience. Those who give me difficulties are my resource. They're actually precious to me. They're my teacher, in a sense, if I can learn. If I can learn from my experience of having been harmed, instead of just lashing out or going inside and feeling bad. I can work with it internally. Therefore, just like treasure appearing in my house without any effort on my part to obtain it, I should be happy to have enemies, for they assist me in my conduct of awakening. And when I said earlier something like I've tried to practice this, this is really what I meant. That when you have difficulties with somebody, then that is a really good time to think, oh, now I have an opportunity to practice patience, because this is the only opportunity I have. All those people who are nice to me, those kind people, I can't practice patience towards them because they're not giving me a hard time. Okay. If you practice patience, it's like practicing driving. Eventually you learn to be good at it and it comes spontaneously. And when you get to that point, then you will not retaliate when harmed. You will let it go right through you and go out the other side and disappear. Because it's only because of ego that we fight back. If we take out the ego, it just goes through us. If somebody insults us, we can think about what they said. We can think, oh, is there any truth in what they said? If there's no truth in it, we can say, actually, you've got it wrong. But if there is even a grain of truth in it, we can say, oh, thanks for pointing that out. Instead of this backlash, sort of instantaneous kickback, whenever anybody says anything unpleasant to us. In other words, it's seen as an opportunity to learn something. And then as we go on in the rest of the chapter, this starts to magnify out towards this altruistic attitude towards sentient beings. Universal equanimity, in other words, not really distinguishing between those that we're close to, those that we're averse to, and those that we're not connected to right now, but actually seeing everybody in the same vein as beings that are worthy of our love and compassion. So in verse 111, thus, since patient acceptance is produced in dependence upon one with a very hateful mind, that person should be worthy of veneration, just like the sacred Dharma, because they are a cause of patience. Just like the sacred Dharma. So we prostrate to the sacred Dharma if we're following a traditional path. Put a Dharma text on the shrine and do a prostration. But in the 8 verses it says, put your enemy on the shrine as your guru and prostrate to them. So that's really what Shantideva is saying too. That doesn't mean we prostrate to their actions. We prostrate to them as someone who's giving us an opportunity to practice patience and thereby generate a mind of love and compassion towards them. Therefore, the Mighty One, i.e. the Buddha, has said that the field of sentient beings is similar to a Buddha field. Similar to, actually, is in brackets. I'd rather leave it that the field of sentient beings is a Buddha field. What is a Buddha field? It's another term for a mandala. What is a mandala? It's a pure environment in which the Buddhas teach us or lead us to enlightenment. That's what a mandala is, whether we're talking in terms, if we're talking in terms of Tantra. But here in the Sutra tradition, we're talking about a Buddha field, but it's the same thing. It's a space within which we learn from the Buddhas. It's like when you go to a teaching by His Holiness Dalai Lama and you're with several thousand people, or you may have been watching some online, it's the same thing. And there are thousands of people all over the world watching. At that point, you're in a Buddha field in a sense, because the Dalai Lama is the Buddha of our time, if you like. He's performing the function that the Buddha performed back then. The Dalai Lama is performing now. as a world teacher. And so we're in a Buddha field, particularly when we're listening to the Dalai Lama. But then here it says that the Mighty One has said that the field of sentient beings is a Buddha field. Now that really brings us down to the world, to the earth, to this life, to this time. And this really grounds Buddhism. It's not an otherworldly religion. You know, there are some religions which teach that you've got to go to paradise, to heaven, to get anything decent. Pie in the sky when you die is a cynical way of expressing that. Not Buddhism. Buddhism's about being here, in this place. This is where we can learn and we can practice and we can become enlightened. Here, in this place. We don't need to go somewhere else. You know, they even talk about a pure land, to be reborn in a pure land. What is a pure land? It's a Buddha field. Well, the field of sentient beings is the Buddha field. So, depending on how you look at it, this is a pure land. Now that's difficult, because when you look at what's happening in Syria, or, you know, other horrific things that are going on in the world, and in the Amazon, or wherever, it's hard to say that's a Buddha field. And of course, it's not a Buddha field for everybody. They don't experience it as a Buddha field. They experience it as terrible suffering. But for us, it can be a Buddha field, because through it, we can generate compassion and we can generate patience. Not to be angry with people who commit atrocities, but to wish to help them to recognize their ignorance, to develop compassion towards them, as well as to those who they treat so badly. This is really what's being said here. And then sentient beings is the Buddha field. For many who have pleased them have thereby reached perfection. So reaching perfection means to become enlightened. And that is achieved through pleasing sentient beings, because that's what enlightenment is for. And so the path has to accord with the result. We can't get to a position where we can benefit all sentient beings if we start denigrating a lot of them or feeling angry towards them. It's just counterintuitive. A Buddha's qualities are gained from the sentient beings and the conquerors alike. Conquerors is another word for the Buddhas, because they've conquered all the obscurations. So why do I not respect them, that's the sentient beings, in the same way as I respect the conquerors? I think there's very similar sentiments in Christianity, actually, probably in all religions, but anyway, definitely here in Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, because all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So every one of them is a potential Buddha. So if we relate to the potential Buddha in each being that we encounter, then we've got reason to venerate them in the sense that we venerate the Buddhas. 118. Thus, since sentient beings have a share in giving rise to the supreme Buddha qualities, that's because it's through practicing compassion, for which we need sentient beings, practicing generosity, for which we need sentient beings, practicing patience, for which we need sentient beings, ethics, for which we need sentient beings. In other words, sentient beings are the source of us becoming enlightened. Surely it's correct to venerate them, as they are similar in merely this respect. So even when you think about those with whom you've had the most trouble in this life, when you look at the potential benefit, even if you haven't realized it yet, of what you can learn from that trouble, then you can feel, in the end, I will feel positive towards them. I will feel grateful. I mean, between us, I had a journey like that with my mother, who I expressed hatred towards from the age of 6, really until I met the Mahayana Buddhism, I was 29. And then slowly, 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 something shifted, fortunately before she died, to the point where, you know, transformed into love. So then, furthermore, what way is there to repay the Buddhas who grant immeasurable benefit and who befriend the world without pretension, other than by pleasing sentient beings? So that's another thing. You know, if we have some great teachers like His Holiness Dalai Lama, who is the embodiment of kindness and compassion, and who, from whom, in my case, I've received so much from him. But, you know, we can all think of who our teachers are and what we receive from them. Then by pleasing sentient beings, by being kind and generous to sentient beings, by being patient with difficult sentient beings, we're actually repaying the kindness of our teachers. So that's another way to look at it. We're going to go to verse 126. There is no doubt that those with the nature of compassion regard all these beings the same as themselves. So this is something that came up in the meditation. You start off by acknowledging your own suffering. You then recognize that all sentient beings also have suffering. And then you feel compassion towards yourself and the wish to, you know, free yourself from suffering. This is called renunciation, which is the seeking your own liberation. And then you go the step further, which is wishing to release all sentient beings from suffering. This is called bodhicitta. So it kind of starts with acknowledging your own suffering, noticing that others have it, feeling concern, care, compassion towards yourself and wanting to free yourself, and then universalizing it and wanting to free sentient beings. Furthermore, those who see this Buddha nature as the nature of sentient beings also see the Buddhas themselves. This is very profound. The nature of every being that has a mind, and when we talk about beings, we mean sentient beings and enlightened beings. What is the nature of their mind? It is clarity and emptiness. It is, in tantric terms, we say clear light. Clear light in a sentient being is obscured. In the enlightened being, it's revealed. It's fully purified. So right now, as Shan keeps emphasizing in the meditations, right now we have the Buddha nature. We have the potential of enlightenment. The only thing we need to do is remove the obscurations. And overcoming our own anger is very, very important to that. Anger is one of the three poisons, and it's the most destructive of all three, and therefore it's the most important one to remove. Destructive in terms of our karma. You know, one moment of anger produces extraordinarily bad, destructive karma. So it's very important to overcome anger. Pleasing living beings delights the Tathagatas, that's the Buddhas, and perfectly accomplishes my own purpose as well. In addition, it dispels the pain and misery of the universe. Therefore, I should always practice it. This is our purpose for being here. This is why we're on this planet right now, is to transform ourselves into bodhicitta and into enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And I emphasize now because the world is going into a very, very critical phase. It's already in it. And we happen to be here right now. And we have the intelligence and the wherewithal to respond positively. So we have to step up. And stepping up means inner stepping up and in different ways outer stepping up. Everybody has their own activity that they do externally. But internally, it's about purifying our mind stream to become altruistic and to become wise in the sense of bringing ourselves into accord with reality. the emptiness of all existence. And then the final two verses of the chapter, and then I'll open it up for a discussion or question answer or sharing. 133. Why do I not see that my future attainment of Buddhahood, as well as glory, renown, and happiness in this very life, all come from pleasing sentient beings? So just think about your own experience of pleasing sentient beings, even in your own small way, and you will have a taste already of that glory, renown, and happiness in this very life. But the future attainment of Buddhahood is the ultimate purpose. And then final verse, while in cyclic existence, patience causes beauty, health, and renown. So these are the karmic fruits of patience. So most of us want to look beautiful. So, you know, practice patience, and then you create the karmic cause for being beautiful. And you might think, well, that's strange. Why is that? Well, just think how ugly someone looks when they're angry, and then think of the karmic result of restraining yourself from that. Then that means that you'll then be attractive, because beautiful simply means attractive. It means that people like to look at you. Whereas nobody likes to look at somebody who's angry. So it's like that. You create the cause for beauty, health, and renown. So the health is also interesting. I can't explain exactly, but I think it's something to do with the channels and how anger just disturbs all your inner elements. Because of these, I shall live for a very long time and win the extensive pleasure of the universal chakra kings. We won't go into the universal chakra kings, but it's just some kind of incredible beings who, you know, they are in the samsaric realm, but they're very powerful, and they live an extraordinarily long time, and they're very happy. Okay. So we'll leave the commentary there and now open it up. If you'd like to give some feedback or sharing, anything you want about today, or, you know, anything, then just put your hand up, and I'll invite you to unmute and you can share. Yes, Sandra.
I'll stop recording now, okay?
Yes, thank you, yes. Okay. Anybody like to share something?
Just by way of dedicating the energy from today, just summarizing some key points of the thinking about the destructiveness of anger, how it harms us physically, and that's researched, can lead to heart attacks, can lead to depression, all sorts of, if you want to look it up, there's a lot of research about the actual harm of anger in the short term, to ourselves, to our relationships, and to our progress on the path. But this doesn't mean we should then turn that anger and frustration in on ourselves and be self-blaming and discouraged and impatient with ourselves. In fact, quite the opposite. It also doesn't mean we have to hide from the fact that others have hurt us, and naming that and recognizing that, but also recognizing how we add to that with some of our own patterns and the way we perpetuate it as well. Dalai Lama says that one of the quotes from him is about how tough life is. And in order to get through, we need optimism, and we need willpower, and we need strength. And he says these come from self-confidence. So this is a healthy self-confidence based on self-understanding, self-compassion, self-acceptance. Because if we develop in this way, if we make effort to take steps in this way. As a self-confident, self-accepting person, we can open our hearts to others. We can recognize that, like us, they suffer, they hurt. Like us, they don't want to be in that pain. Like us, they may do self-destructive things, trying to get away from pain, but in fact creating more pain for themselves and others. So we are kind to ourselves and kind to others. So let's dedicate this afternoon, the whole day, in fact, towards developing our own patience, our own inner strength, so that we can become sources of help and support and eventually become enlightened, all to benefit others. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Can I just say that this is such an important topic?